And so the thing that Steiner's pointing to is on the other side of the ultraviolet, there's a whole world of intuitions, of ideas, of hunches, call it what you like, really call it what you like, I don't mind. As long as you're describing, you have a hunch in English, like you're in business, okay, you see a market or you see a product which belongs to a market that only you have seen. And you go to a bank, you say, I need $1 million to bring this to market. And he says, what market? Because I haven't even seen the product yet. So what are you talking about? And you say, you just have to trust me that I've seen something which will exist in the future if you give me the capital to make it visible. It's not necessarily the way the conversation goes, but that's the point of it. And he says, how am I going to do that? That's huge risk. And you put your own money in that risk. You're not asking, no, I'm not putting in my customers' money in something which I can't see on their behalf. If you can see it, put your own money in, and then no one gets hurt except you. I think this is hugely healthy, and that's behind the difference between equity and debt in Western finance. Don't finance risk with debt. This is asking for trouble, right? You finance your risk with your own money. And these are hugely important relationships hidden inside conventional accounting. And so the banker is saying, necessarily, I represent the whole of humanity whose capital I'm going to allocate, but not to be thrown down the drain. And you ask me to give you money for something that not even you can see, right? Well, that's really important because, yes, I can see it. And my job is to make this visible, whatever this product is, and therefore the market, meaning the need it's going to meet. Because then we can say, okay, now we can come in on this. So you have a whole lead period covered by risk, but you have to make visible and comprehensible and financeable to someone who's not yet seen it. This is really an important story. Well, that world, however you describe that world, that is what capital is pointing to. It's not an asset. And even strictly speaking, on a balance sheet, there would be no capital in a balance sheet. So when you have a balance sheet, you have assets and liabilities in the Western world, or active and passive. And when someone, let's say they buy shares in a company, you have an increase in the own capital of that company on the liability side, and on the active side, you have increase in cash. But the actual transaction itself, I receive $1 million, so I'm owed that. So I have a liability of $1 million, and I have cash of $1 million. These are the two sides of that one transaction. But that capital is not there out of its own volition. I've sucked it into being by my idea. It's me who said I need $1 million to do this, and therefore I need this, that, and all the other. And if I add all these assets up that I need, my means of production, if you like, that I need to do what I need to do, at market prices, it comes to $1 million, and that's why I need $1 million. So in fact, even on a balance sheet, if you look at it systematically and didactically, as it were, the capital is brought into being by the entrepreneur's initiative and his hunch. And this is what Steiner is referring to when he means Geist. He means the whole world hidden in the world of capacities, capital. You could say head, meaning, almost beyond the brain. And I'm saying this at length because one has to really live into that. You have to go back to the 19th century, before the middle 19th century, before the idea of trade cycles came into being, as a very plausible explanation of things. But you have to go to that and not have that thought. Otherwise, you won't come to the idea of capital in the way I'm trying to describe it. You would already have modified it in order to satisfy your self-interest. It's a very strange thing I'm saying, but I think it's true. And so in this way, you can come first to your first image of capital, and then your second image of capital will be, in no way is it a commodity, because I can't buy and sell it. And so if someone says, I can sell you capital, you'd already said, no, you can't, it's not possible. You can allocate it to me. Because what am I going to do with my capital? I've said I need $1 million because the factory I need is $1 million. I don't actually need $1 million. I need enough money to buy a factory in a monetized economy. So the money bit is kind of a sort of red herring. It's not quite a red herring, but it's incidental. It's hugely important that you monetize the economy in history. But it's a kind of, it introduces an element which can be very confusing. Because the only reason I need $1 million is because the factory and the oven and everything else in it cost me $1 million. Or the 2 years of salaries I'm going to have to pay so somebody can eat and work. I need to have that in advance. I don't actually need any capital. I need the resources. And if you can allocate them to me some other way, I'm happy. And so people don't get all the implied relationships hidden behind modern capital. And that in fact, in a modern economy, as in an old economy, they would never have been initially mediated by finance, by money. You just say in a village, who's the best person to bake bread? And when someone said, that's me, you say, okay, we go with this baker. And if someone said, I also want to bake, you say, you don't have a right to open a bakery. We've got a baker already. There's a more of a kind of sounds weird from a modern point of view, but look at guilds, look at the whole way economies are organized. So you didn't like, I live in, and there's 3 coffee shops in the street. They're all struggling. And then one guy's opened up another one. And in 6 weeks, 2 more have opened up. They're all going to kill their own business because they think they have the right to open up a coffee shop opposite another coffee shop. I get it on one level, but this is just an egotistical way of being. Maybe there are enough coffee shops. Maybe you should join forces with the existing do something, but don't just open up another one because you're just wrecking your whole economy. And you can see it very clearly in where I live and many other places, because we think we have a right out of our self-interest to just step into public space and do what we want without reference to what's already there. So all this kind of thing that I'm describing is, for me, what an associative economist would have in mind when he or she looks into the conceptual basis of it, let alone the policy, and then learn the practical implementation of it. And in this sense, capital, the focus on capital, is not an asset to be acquired for a price and to be sold at a higher price. It's somehow being, it's not even being stewarded. It's my call on humanity's liquidity for as long as I need it. And then it's going to go back to the pool of liquidity. And if I think like that, it will work alchemically. There will always be enough capital for what I need, as long as what I need is clear, conscious, and calculated. So I always say of an entrepreneur, there's no reason you can't give me a financial plan where you show to me the amount of capital that you are going to allocate to yourself out of humanity's liquidity. I can't make that calculation because I'm not you. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know what your history is. I don't know what your success rate is. I don't know what your stamina is. I don't know nothing. So the only person who can actually allocate capital is you. And what will allocate it is your ability to be clear. What is it you want to do over what time frame, in what conditions? And you just have to make that happen. And the capital will be validated. Not by the banks, not by the financial market, not by nothing. And this is a very strange story to tell in a world which allocates capital by finance, by whether you can afford to pay me for it or not, and by all sorts of complicated stories that if I let you have it, there won't be enough for somebody else. This is just nonsense in the realm of capital. There's always enough for what we want to do. So we don't actually have to allocate it at all in the sense of sharing a finite resource among, an increasing number of people. This is just Malthusian nonsense. Or today it's now, I don't mean he was stupid, but you understand why Malthus might think in these terms. But he wouldn't today think like this. It's just crazy. Plus, you have the proof that Malthus was wrong to support you. So I'm saying all this because then you come into a whole different world of capital, and then you can start to see that actually the only person who can allocate capital is the person who's going to make use of it. So ownership of capital becomes kind of yesterday's story. What matters is the person who's going to use it, and that becomes very difficult for the allocators of capital, very difficult for trust funds, for people people with private wealth who then have too much and they put it in foundations or family offices. When they think that they're going to decide how their capital is going to be used, they make a mistake. When they realize that the future use of their capital will be decided by the people who get hold of it, then they're on to the future. And it's best if they match their policies to that reality. But those people who want to use capital are going to have to become more financially literate. they can't simply grab other people's wealth and say, you know, I want some of that, without the whole experience of how wealth is generated. This is a big problem. So you have to increase everyone's financial literacy, including the people in family offices, and then you will see, they say, oh, so in fact, financial literacy governs everything. You know, it's not good use of my money to be illiterate in my use of it, or in my use of it by distributing it, like Jeff Bezos' wife or something like that. It's not good enough for her just to send $1 million to everyone, ask for $1 million by email. This isn't going to be very useful. She needs to go into some detail into their story and increase her financial literacy. I don't know her, but I can say fairly generally, it must be like this. And all those who think, I've got a crazy scheme, I just write to his wife and she will, you know, this isn't going to happen. She will want to see, where's the leverage? If I give you this amount of money, where's the leverage in this? Where's your financial literacy? Where's your wealth creating skill? You know, I'm not going to throw money at holes in the ground. She and a million other people, Warren Buffett, and lots of people have this problem. So from both sides, from those who've got excess capital, from those who need capital, the thing which is going to balance it out is whether they're equally financially literate about what capital is and how it functions. And then I won't say the problem will disappear. That's a bit, you know, idealistic. But then family offices will have far less of a problem, and on the one hand, and the ability and access to capital, which is the biggest problem for social entrepreneurs and poor people and all the rest of it. Access to capital, not access to income, is their biggest problem. And these things are two sides of the same coin. And you can see it in modern techniques when people don't go via the banks, they go through online credit sharing, so-called microcredit arrangements, where this private individual sends to some woman high up in the Andes who's knitting or whatever they think she's doing, 50 minuscule dollars from their point of view, but these are big dollars when they get high up in the Andes, right? And they don't go via the banking system. So the more people become financially literate, the financial transactions become more interpersonal than via third parties. And all this is a consequence of financial literacy, predicated on what the banking system is predicated on, double entry bookkeeping. You just remove the intermediaries because now you don't need an intermediary. This is done for you because you kind of share the same science, the same understanding of finance. And it's this which is the balancing factor, not convincing you to let your money go more easily or whatever people try and do, or funneling money through NGOs and all these things that go on. The more we understand finance in the technical sense and practice it in our own cases, we just find ourselves all speaking the same language. This will be the balance, and nothing else will balance it. So, so capital in this sense, in the end, it translates into a balance sheet line item, you might say, or an account on the balance sheet, but it doesn't begin there. It begins in this world, which Steiner calls Geist, which an English-speaking person would leave unnamed. Except I'll give you an example of what an English-speaking person will say. This is a meeting I was in. It was a memorial for a colleague who was a well-known economic historian, and he died unexpectedly. So we had this big memorial in King's College, London in October 2018, I think. And one of the speakers there was the then chief economist of the Bank of England. So, you know, so to be the chief economist of the Bank of England means you're pretty much embedded in everything I'm critiquing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the bank and you wouldn't be its chief economist. But he said, more or less verbatim, the thing he got to understand in this deceased colleague, he knew the secret of research. And he said, the one thing he did as a researcher, he got as large a data sample as he possibly could for whatever he was researching. Not because there was any news in the data, because he knew, as any researcher knows, there is no news in data. That isn't why you collect it, right? But if you have too narrow database, your intuitive mind is not going to wake up. So the reason you have a bigger sample as you can get is because that would cause your intuitive mind to wake up. and then your intuitive mind will receive an insight. This is weird stuff for the chief economist of the Bank of England to say in public. But when you come into that level, this is what I call maybe a true materialist. They're well able to say at this level of finance, there's a blue sky. We may not yet have the language that belongs to it, but we certainly take our cues from it. And it's quite something for a chief economist at the Bank of England to say, a central bank to say, that there is no news in data. Tell that to the guys who had the efficient market hypothesis. All the news is in the data, according to them. And he says, there's no news in the data. What your collection of data does to you as the collector, it wakens you become sensitized to receiving an intuition, not to having one. This is super subtle stuff, right? So you could say in a certain language, the more clear we are about the material world, the more clear we are about it. We don't have wrong descriptions and so on. The more clear we can be about what we're looking at, the more easily the gods can speak to us. We're not seeing anything as economists. We're just perceiving, and then the gods, that's the point of this image here. When we get to this point, the gods have something they can speak into. It will appear not like a message from Moses on a mountain, just some chief economist will have an idea which works, right? And if he says, that's my idea, I've got a patent on it and all the rest of it, well, okay, that's his self-interest. But he knows that he doesn't need this recognition. The recognition is his idea in monetary policy works, whereas other people's ideas don't work. And what concerns us is not the benefit to the famous economist for his famous idea or his famous calculation, but the whole of humanity benefits from a correct monetary policy construct. And that is where you get your thanks as an economist. So I've said an awful lot of things here, but I say it deliberately because if we can think our way into this world, it's simply there to be seen. And then something like capital, as we looked at with labor and land, we start to understand them very differently. But in the end, they arrive in a set of accounts. So I'm not describing something which cannot be accounted for. This is one of the problems of many critics of economic life. They start saying there's a qualitative world and there's a quantitative, and the reductionists only get the quantitative. I say, well, it's not strictly true if you do your research. We have both. We like this one because we understand it better, so we forget this one exists in our definitions, but don't think it's not there. And we have the quadrant of angels in case we've left something out, and thank God there are angels to come into that quadrant because we're not in it. There's lots of things they don't yet have the vocabulary for. But if I use a strange image, they're kind of like poets. They're first in the realm of syllables. They don't have the consonants to attach to their, to bring all their syllables into words and sentence and meaning. But they are kind of like the poets. They're out there realizing this word doesn't work. So let's have some blue sky thinking. If they knew anything about the sky, it's not blue. So what, that's one of the things Steiner's getting at here. The sky is not blue. It depends how much density of air you happen to look through, whether it's blue or not, right? So if they knew anything what they were talking about, or if they even explored their intuitive explanations, they would come into a world that I'm describing. It's not a world that they don't have access to. And that's the world, to come back to Steiner, that I think he's just assuming on the part of his readers. I want to keep coming back to this because if you're not in that world, you won't get what he's talking about. You simply won't get it. And then you will think he's from yesterday, and you will not see he's actually from today onwards as an economist, especially in finance.